Hey, welcome to the Do Good Work podcast. Today we're talking to Brian Jackson. He is the owner of Sandler Training of San Diego. And Brian lives here in San Diego with his wife Risa and his 4 children, Weston, who's 13, Wyatt, who's 11, Waylon, who's 8, and Layla, who is 2. And he enjoys taking his boys camping with the YMCA Adventure Club and has served as a past chief of the nation. And he's on a mission through reinforcement to teach clients how to sell more effectively and comfortably, achieving their goals in business and life. I think today's episode, I want you to really hone in on the art of letting go in a sales process and what that actually means, what that looks like, and what that experience may be for you and on your next sales prospecting call. Look forward to hearing your thoughts from this. And here you are with Brian Jackson. Brian, finally, we have you on the podcast. Thanks for being on.
It's a pleasure to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
You're trying to probably get us scheduled for over a year now, right?
Yeah, everything happens when it's supposed to. I'm excited to see what happens here. This is the first podcast I've done in over a year. Thanks for having me.
That's exciting, man. Hey, I've talked to plenty of people in sales, and we've had great conversations around different tactics and approaches to sales methodologies, phases in a sale, the conversations, the relationship, the emotional IQ, like the whole nine. Something that I thought was really interesting that you mentioned was the fact of letting go of expectations. And this is more than just, I don't want to just call it like flaccid sales. Like you just show up like, we'll see what happens. Like, I don't think it's just like chill sales like that, but there is a psychology in I think in any form of work where if you focus on the process and being present in what you're doing, as opposed to focusing on the outcome or the agenda, you can produce your best work. And I kind of want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, there's a lot you just packed into that. Let's back up, and I love the direction that you took this, because what we're not talking about is, like you said, we're not saying that we're suggesting that people just show up and wing it.
Yeah.
What we're suggesting is that let's even dial it back further. When somebody's in sales, nature of the job is that your income is directly proportional to your results. You either win and you put bread on the table, or you lose and you don't. And so that's what, in my opinion, makes sales unique from every other profession. And you can call it whatever you want. You can call yourself a consultant or a salesperson or a business owner. But if your livelihood depends upon an outcome, then it's sales. When we talk about letting go, what we're really talking about is that we can't put all that pressure on ourselves to try to push people to an agenda,
Mm-hmm.
Pushiness, persuasion, manipulation, we can all sense that from a mile away. We have human instincts that we can sense that kind of thing. And when we do that, we push people away. So by letting go and detaching from outcomes, paradoxically, it creates better outcomes. People feel more comfortable. They don't feel the pressure. They feel like they can trust you more. And therefore, they're more open and honest. And that allows, again, honest dialogue and outcomes.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit, because you mentioned, I think that when you just focus on an outcome, you kind of set yourself up for disappointment. And obviously the outcome, and there is a drive. I mean, you know it, I know it. Like we want to win, we want to go, we want to hustle, we make things happen. We wake up early, we crush, we do whatever we need to do to make things, the outcome that we want.
Yeah.
But this isn't to say that dismissing of that outcome, but I think it's more about focusing in the actual present moment of what you're doing and cognizant around that moment versus I'm just going to treat you like a sack of meat so that you can sign on the dotted line.
How do you get salespeople that are, again, driven to get as much done in as little time as possible? How do you get them to stop and slow down and be present in the moment, right? It's just completely counterintuitive. I mean, much of my youth, I so prided myself on being a type A person. I kind of wore my impatience on my sleeve like a badge of honor, like I'm not going to wait in that line, right? And it took me years of adulting myself to realize that there's a reason why people wait in lines. It's because there's some delicious breakfast waiting at the end of it, or there's a great show to see.
Yeah.
And so think about that in a sales call, right? Like
Mhm.
you got a salesperson who's just, chomping at the bit to close a deal. And that impatience that's tangible. I can imagine a lot of my prospects at my younger age were probably, I think they used to say, Mo, you're tenacious, and I thought, yep,
Mhm.
yep, that's me. I'm tenacious. But if a salesperson is instead in the moment, present, emotionally even keel, person across the table senses no pressure at all. Salesperson is able to relax and see and hear things because they're not just thinking about what they're about to say or what they want to say, right? They're better able to diagnose issues, better able to uncover truth because of how much more willing someone's able to open up, because of how much more comfortable they feel. And so, that's a big part of what our program's all about, Raul, because to get somebody to kind of change their mindset entirely, their attitude, I mean, it takes time. It takes time. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of reinforcement. I mean, I've been adulting myself since I was 31 years old. I'm 45 now. And I mean, it's just little incremental change, week over week.
The improvement. And I think, I mean, it's just so that our audience knows, like when we're talking about these, like these aren't just your quick one twos. I think that the goal here is to develop a deeper relationship, because some of these tactics just to build true relationship. And like this is I mean, personally for me to do six-figure sales, I mean, I haven't done a seven-figure sale yet, right?
Mhm.
But I think that's kind of like the realm that we're talking about building real relationship and understanding the true needs of the other person. And I kind of want to like dive into that of how you, through vulnerability, not just like, let me just tell you all my problems that I'm having,
Mhm.
but through that transparent vulnerability, when you're building relationship, to guide the sales process and almost doing like an inverted self-discovery or inverted discovery call, where the prospect guides themselves to a discovery and you're there to facilitate that. And I think that's, to me, that's the most important process in the sales.
Did you get that off my website? Guide themselves to a discovery? Or did you just say that?
I just said that. That's what I like to do.
Yeah, that's exactly what we say. Like literally, we say that every day,
Hmm.
guiding people on a path of their own self-discovery. It's funny. Well, probably not a coincidence, but here's an example of something we talked about this morning.
Yeah.
This morning, we were talking about discussing budget and posing the question of what might be to gain, like what might be gained from proposing to scrap a project. Like, hey, you know what? This doesn't seem like it's going to work. Let's scrap it. And that kind of thing befuddles most people. I did 3 sessions this week, and each session's got about 20 people in it. And when I proposed that question of what might be gained from scrapping a project, most of the people are befuddled. I mean, they're not commissioned to scrap projects. They're commissioned to close projects.
Makes sense.
So, but if you think about it, most of us provide a product or a service that somebody else can provide. Most of us in a selling situation are going to be compared to, one or two or three other vendors.
Mhm.
And I'd be willing to wager that if you were to propose to scrap a project, you're the only one of the other people that they're about to vet. They're going to propose that you scrap a project. And when you say, hey, you know what, I'm not sure if this is a fit. I'm not sure if this is going to work. On some level, consciously or subconsciously, you have now set yourself apart from all of your competition. You're the only one that's been honest. You're the only one telling them something that they don't want to hear,
Hmm.
and they're going to walk away. First of all, they're going to fight for the project oftentimes and say, no, 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 this is important to us. This is something we need to do. Here's why. Or let's figure out a way we can make this work. But just know that, like, in a world where we can all be commoditized, oftentimes, that is one thing that can set you apart. That, again, on a conscious or subconscious level, it tells them that I can trust this person. They're not just telling me what I want to hear.
Let's talk about that really, because this is, I talk about the inverted side of, in terms of how businesses need to diversify or separate themselves from a commodity through some other things that you can do in leadership, some other things you can do in the way that you structure. I love how this is tied to that, but on the sales side.
Mm.
And even as you said that, and I'm thinking about just me, like I had anxiety. I'm gonna tell, like you're telling us to tell a prospect, Brian, I don't know how, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, my mind goes, do you say this on a call? Do
Yeah.
you say this over an email? How do you get that hook point? Because I feel like they have to argue for themselves and like defend that project. And I see what you're doing with that. But personally, I felt anxiety when you
Mm.
said that, like you're pushing it away.
Yeah. And you felt anxiety, and that's a feeling. And we know from the studies of transactional analysis, which is what birthed Sandler and most of the other selling methodologies out there. And if you've ever read the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, it's a pretty popular book out right now. It's all based in transactional analysis, that decisions are justified intellectually with the adult and often influenced by the parent ego, but they're motivated to make decisions emotionally.
Mhm.
So that anxiety you're feeling, that's tapping into that child ego state, those
Mhm.
emotions. And that's where you want your prospects to be. And you got to make sure they stay okay. Can't make them feel not okay in a sales call, but
Mhm.
that's where you'll start to uncover some truth, some truth, some real feelings. So here's an extreme example. An extreme example of that would be if you said to me, Brian, why should we do business with you? And that's something you'll hear in terms of DISC. If listeners are familiar with DISC, it's a personality profile index. And the high D is the very dominant, direct profile. And oftentimes decision makers are high Ds. They're very direct. Think of Donald Trump and The Apprentice. Why should we work with you? Well, the response to that ought to be, I don't know if you should. I don't know if you should. I my
Instead of arguing for your point.
Yeah, like you asked me, why should you work with me? I don't know if you should. You kind of probably should combine that with maybe a laugh or something to kind of loosen things up. But yeah, that's what we're here to figure out today is, should we work together or not? Right? Let's get into that. Most salespeople, when they're posed the question of why should we work with you, are going to dump into features and benefits and kind of explaining themselves, and they're all going to sound alike.
The race to the bottom. It's a race to the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah. I like what you're doing here because I've read this from Chris Lockheed and in his category Pirates about the difference between being better versus playing the different game.
Hmm.
Because when you play the better game, it's like, hey, I'm better than you. I could drive this car. I do this status. I'm on these magazines. And it's just a race to the bottom because then you compete on features, benefits, and price.
Right.
But when you're different, this is where this is a more brand play that when you're different, you open up a different, let's just call it a cloud thought in the prospect or the listener or the viewer's mind where, hey, this is not, I can't segment this person into some other category that I had or some other
Yeah.
bucket. They're on their own and they stuck out. So I like this, where this is going and how you have the sales conversation and get it off, like not too aggressive, but also you loosen things up. And walk us through a little bit more about, now you've loosened us up.
Well, let me dive into that. Actually, let me add on to what you just said there a little bit. It's not just about being different. It's a big part of it, right? We have a thing like in Sandler, when they zig, we zag, Yeah, that's true. But what's also important is that it's about, psychologically speaking, it's about pattern interrupts, right?
Mhm.
That
Yep.
they kind of expect salespeople to say and do things. And so when you are different and you break that pattern, now these two people are not just playing tapes to each other in a conversation. They're actually having to think, and when they're thinking and they're actually really communicating and not playing tapes, that's when you can really get to the emotional human aspect of things. So like, you know if I'm at a rental car counter and somebody says, would you like to buy the whatever, would you like to fill your tank up, or whatever they ask, fill your tank, the
Like people,
insurance. And I
yeah,
used to rent cars every week when I was in sales leadership, traveling all the time. And I'd always just be ready for that question because I'm in a hurry. I got to go meet somebody somewhere. I'm like, yep, no. And the answers are no, 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 no. And so in selling, especially in the beginning, like prospecting, people are really, they got their tapes ready to play. As soon as they recognize a situation that's familiar, that's just the way our human brain works. So when we are different, we interrupt those patterns and we get to real answers, the truth. And even if it's bad truth, not the truth we want to hear, like we're not a fit, like we're not interested. Well, that's okay. Well, what made you say that? Right? We can get down and maybe clarify some misunderstandings or overcome objections. But the first thing is to get to the truth.
I wrote it down as you were saying it, and I want to dive deeper in uncovering more of the emotion of the sale
Mm-hmm.
and kind of navigating that, because I feel like that's, I mean, that is the number one skill set here, is understanding another human and having empathy, not sympathy for the other person.
Yeah.
Empathy, understanding, and navigating that towards if it's a fit or not a fit. So once we've focused on uncovering truth, I mean, we've lowered their guard. We're focusing on uncovering the truth. If it's a good fit, not a good fit.
Yeah.
Walk us through kind of like the emotional landscape. It sounds weird, right? Emotional landscape of the conversation.
Here's where I'll start. One of the things that we talk about a lot is first creating the environment where we can have honest dialogue. And if you think about, like, if you put on, if instead of thinking like a salesperson all the time, if you think like a diagnostician, a doctor, right? And remember, the topic here we started out talking about is letting go, right? A doctor deals with people every day coming in sick. They care. They care about their patients. I know that every doctor I've always ever worked with, they cared about me, you know.
Yeah.
But they also have to let go. They cannot attach themselves emotionally to the outcomes, or they would be suicidal. I mean, it'd be awful. So in a doctor's office, right, they're just simply there to determine, do you have the problems that they solve, and are you committed to fixing them? And that's it. Like, everything else is out of their control. Before we have these sales conversations, we have to first make the patient, the prospect, feel comfortable, like, hey, here's what we're here to do. I might get a sense that we're not a fit. Please do me the same courtesy. We might find out that it's this, in which case we might have to do that. Is that what you were kind of hoping that might happen here? We tell everyone up front what's happening. What's the most annoying thing that salespeople do? They call you in the middle of dinner or whatever, and then you answer the phone, and because they're so excited to have a live human on the line, they just start talking. Salespeople just start to feature dump, and it's almost like they're trying to fit in as many words as they can before you hang up, right?
Yeah.
And that's we know how that ends, right? Hang up the phone. But if somebody were to first say, Raul, it doesn't matter how much of a inconvenient time it is. If you answer the phone and I said, Raul, let me tell you why. Well, first I'd say, is this a bad time or something like that? But you might say, yeah, oh, what is this about? And I'd say, Raul, let me tell you why I called you, and then you can tell me if it makes any sense for us to talk, and it might not. Is that fair?
Yeah.
99.9% of the time, people will say yes. Some people, if they're in an extremely bad mood, I will say, you know what? It sounds like this is an awful time. Should I hang up? Right? And sometimes they will say, yes. Okay. Hang up. Just hang up. They just saved you. You could call the same person back. And I know it's hard to get a hold of people, but they'll answer, and you can even remind them, I'm that guy that you said I should hang up. And they'll say, oh, yeah, thanks, man. That was crazy. Bad timing, but I can talk now. Most of them are just irritable, discontent. They're just busy business owners. And when you say, should I hang up? They'll say, well, what is this? And I say, okay, well, let me tell you why I called you. And then you can tell me if it makes any sense for us to talk, and it might not. Is that fair? And that's an upfront contract, we call it, making it to where it's okay for us to now have an honest
A dialogue.
dialogue.
Yeah. Not a sales conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Because everyone has needs that. I mean, the most important person to the prospect is themselves, and they have their own needs and that they're thinking about. So when you start feature dumping your goals and agenda, like, they could care less, even if
Yeah.
you are solving the needs. So I like that this is more of that,
And
of
listen to
that diagnostic approach.
the letting go part of that too, right? To
Yeah.
say that, you have to believe it, that I'm okay if this person does not want to talk. like, because it's not about me, it's about them. So,
Mm.
you know, if somebody wants me to hang up, I'm going to hang up. If, and anyway, so yeah, it all starts with the mindset of letting go.
I
Definitely.
love that. I love that. What's exciting for you right now? You're working with how many people right now? Like you said, two groups of 20s, that's 40. So I'm assuming you got a couple hundred, right?
Yeah, well, it's good. I've got about 130 humans in the program, and it's about 20 to 25 paying clients. And half of those clients are companies with sales teams of 5 and upward. And then the other half are either individuals or companies with teams of like 2 or 3 people.
What trends are you seeing now that sales have? I mean, sales have gone digital for quite a while now. The Zoom increases since the last couple of
Yep.
years. Like, what trends are you seeing? Because I mean, the principles of human psychology won't change, thankfully.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
humans or
Not for
will
not
be the
not within
same.
our lifetime, but little by
Yeah, I
little,
know.
century over century. But
Oh yeah, but that's future down. But what's some of the trends that you are seeing when it comes to applying some of these principles? Because I get the spam texts,
yep.
the emails, the inbound, like, and I never even read anything. So how what are the trends that excite you the most? And where do you see, now that we're settling, some offices are opening back up. Where
Mm,
do you see sales in the next? I mean, we're early in the like
yeah.
2020s, the next decade or so.
Boy, I mean, that's funny. I don't get asked that a lot, strangely, but
Welcome to the pod.
there's a lot of there's a lot of trends. There are a lot of trends. One of the trends is that I think trends are shorter and faster than ever before. Like, just in general,
Hmm.
trends come and go much faster. You take LinkedIn, for example. I mean, sometime in the last 12 months, LinkedIn came and went. It's just not effective, I don't think, as much as it used to be, because it's getting completely inundated,
Saturated.
just
Yep.
saturated. So, there's companies out there that help with being better at it, being more effective. And it's important because there's just so many people out there that just don't know what to do with it. And they're just muddying up the waters. A friend of mine, Greg Grant, and I like to share screenshots of some of the worst LinkedIn messages. And, like, for example, I got one the other day. Somebody sent me a LinkedIn message asking me if I ever thought about franchising, and I own a franchise.
And I get the same things. Have
I
you ever thought about
I
writing
got
a book?
I got a franchise. It's one of the biggest. We have 250 franchisees like me all over the world. We've been around for 40 years, and you didn't take up the time to know that. It just it irritates me as a sales professional to see people just ruining a good platform. And this is history. It's an indicator of the future. So, like, if you look at when the fax machine came out, it was only a matter of a year or so before business people would put their trash can right under the fax machine. And that way, during the nighttime, when all those faxes came through, it would just fall naturally into the recycle trash. With emails, it's the first thing you do is clean your emails every morning. But anyway, you asked for trends. One of the trends that excites me, man, is that as a result of COVID, people are really craving face-to-face communication. And
Yeah.
um, I've actually, believe it or not, had some pretty good results just from in-person cold calling. That's just crazy. But if you're in a job where you're like out doing site visits and you happen to pass potential clients, I mean, I encourage you to stop the car when it's practical and just go in and introduce yourself to people. And it's never been welcomed more with open arms. It hasn't been in decades as it is now.
Yep.
And so that's the thing, is that it's emails tougher and tougher, and LinkedIn's getting tougher and tougher. But, Zoom does provide the opportunity to have better communication in terms of body language that we didn't have over the phone. So that's an improvement.
Yeah.
And I see opportunities to get back to some live communication as well.
Yeah, if I mean, I don't have a deeper like finger on the pulse like you do, but I'm seeing or hearing really like just the straight up cold call, like all these feeds or people commenting. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
people want to connect, and it's no
Yeah.
longer a cold call; it's like a connect call. And that's cool that you mentioned about like you're driving and then you just do it, in shop
Yeah.
like
When it's
stops and
practical, right? Like,
yeah,
I mean, cold calling on the phone or in person is it's a beating, and it'll drag you down if you do too much of it. But when it's practical, do it. Like it's, you're in an office building and you can see the listings. I mean, just, why not? You're there, right? And people, you'd be surprised how often they say, yeah, he's right here. Why don't you just go talk to him? Because they're not getting inundated with salespeople like they would have been 20 years ago. I might be dating myself a little bit, but yeah.
No, don't worry about
And
that. I think it's important because I think the old is now new,
yeah.
and the new is now old. I mean, I'm seeing a cycle.
And it's one thing that surprises me that I'm, being that this technology is not new, it still surprises me that so many people don't do this, man. But if salespeople are not doing their own individual marketing, email campaigns, and then tracking click data, so that when you make those phone calls, you're really starting with the people that clicked on these emails multiple times. I mean, making it so that you're working smart, right? Not just hard.
The engagement. Yep.
Yeah, like I bet you if I served 100 people, clients, salespeople, less than 10 of them take the time to track clicks and call the clicks. And that, I mean, that would just save a tremendous amount of time and make your calls more productive. That's a no-brainer with as easy it is to find softwares that you can track clicks with,
That's one of the trends that I'm seeing too, right? Like, I think we have to be more multifaceted as professionals. Like, this, as a salesperson, you need to know the marketing side of the data and the analytics and know why it means. On the marketing side, I'm seeing that we have to be somewhat junior developers in some cases,
Yeah.
right?
No, you're right. Like the old-fashioned salesperson, stereotypical salesperson was just a social being. It was just that this person had the gift of gab. And if you had the gift of gab, you could be in sales. Nowadays, that actually, well, often will even work against you. But what's equally important is being process driven, being able to manage your CRM and use that data to work smart, because it is more sophisticated now. Like you've got to be able to be strategic and creative and manage the whole process. And that way you can track what works and what doesn't work and do more of what's working and less of what's not working. And if you're just winging it, you
Can't do that
yeah,
anymore.
you're not gonna
Actually.
you're gonna lose. You're gonna finish at the bottom of the rankings and you're gonna get, put on a PIP eventually.
Yeah, no, that's actually a huge trend for our listeners there too. Like, I think that sales in the future right now you have to be dependable and you have to be on top of it, because like you just mentioned, it's not just super creative and social. You also have to have the analytical. Even if I know you might be rolling your eyes right now listening to this, I get it. Trust me, I get it. You just want to be closing all day. Trust me, I know. But I completely agree with where you're at. Like, prospects are smarter. They have access to more information. And then also we need to make sure that I think a key missing component too is understanding what you mentioned, the underlying emotional intelligence, being able to navigate that. But Brian, for our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to, one, thank you for this episode, and two, learn a little bit more about you and what you're up to?
Where's the best place? Well, my email is brian with an .jackson at sandler.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. It's pretty sure my LinkedIn domain is actually Sandler Training. I don't know how I got away with that, but I was the first one.
We'll add the links on the show notes. It's awesome.
I pulled that off. I don't know where I got that custom URL when there's 250 other Sandler Training franchisees out there, and I was the first one to pick Sandler Training. But yeah, I'm always happy to help people, and people are always welcome to drop in and check out one of our coaching sessions without any expectations.
Wonderful. Well, Brian, appreciate you, and we'll take it from here.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. If you enjoyed today's conversation with Brian, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a comment or a review with your number one takeaway from today's episode. And while you're there, if you can leave us up to a 5-star review, that allows us, especially here for the work that we're doing at Do Good Work, to allow us to be found in more feeds and more podcast streams. If you have any suggestions for the show or any questions that you'd like me to go deeper on, either with guests or requests or topics, you can shoot me an email at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.